Hello, hello, and welcome to everyone. Gosh, a lot of people on today's webinar. How is everyone doing? Please type into the chat. My name is Lauren Coughlin with the Kolme Group. We're really excited that you're here today. So our team has spent decades managing programs and portfolios in the tens of millions, and we were consistently frustrated with the limited tools available to manage our portfolios well. Then we discovered data-driven PPM, and it was such a revolution that we decided to make it our professional focus. We are based in Phoenix, Arizona, but we do have offices globally. And we're just really excited to be able to bring ideas about project management, change management, resource management, and really focus today on the PPM tool cost. So without further ado, let's meet today's presenter. So let's talk a little bit about what happened with Kim. So Kim's our presenter, and he is a PMP certified project manager with over 20 years of experience managing projects, programs, and PMOs. He's the co-founder and partner of Kolme Group, and I'd like to welcome him now. So Kim, thanks so much for being here today. I know we're all excited to learn about what will a PPM tool cost. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks, Lauren. And hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. So today we're going to be talking about how much a PPM costs. So we're going to, first I'll hit you with the very simple but the very incomplete answer of kind of the sticker price of a PPM cost. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the must-haves, nice-to-haves, things that can really impact your cost, both up and down. And then we'll talk about some of the hidden costs that kind of can sneak up on you, and also how to maximize the value you get out of your PPM tool. And if we've got time, we'll open it up to some Q&A. All right, let's jump in here. Actually, before I spoke a little soon, so before we get started, let's do a quick poll. Just like to get a sense from everybody who's on our webinar today, where are you in your PPM tool search? You should see a poll pop up, and just trying to get a sense for, you have you have one that's broken, you're looking for a new one, you're shopping, you're just curious maybe, or you're in the middle of an implementation. And let's take a look at our results here. And all right, we've got a lot of people that are curious. Some people are in the process of implementing, so great, great, great. Some are shopping and already in the RFX process. Great. Well, I think today's content can help you regardless of where you are in that process. Even if you're already on that journey, we're going to cover a couple things that can maybe help you out if you're already getting started. So if you're on this webinar, assuming that you've already sort of decided that you're going to go down the path, or you're considering going the path of using a project and portfolio management tool. And, you know, from myself, I come from a position, probably like a lot of you, where I used to run PMOs for quite a number of years before I started implementing tools. And, you know, we would find that we had messes to clean up. We had to try to find out why things kept going off track. We had to have reporting and visibility. And if you don't have the right tools in place, you might find yourself up until midnight every Monday or Friday, whatever your cycle is, trying to get your reports together, and you just sort of, you know, smack your forehead and think there has got to be a better way. And the good news is that there are a lot of really good project and portfolio management tools on the market that can really help you and your PMO function much more efficiently. And better yet, these tools have become very, very accessible over the last few years. They're easy to use. They're very, very powerful and configurable. But, you know, as soon as you start thinking, wow, you know, I've got these problems, I bet a good PPM tool can help solve it, the first question that probably comes to mind after that is, wow, how much is that going to cost me? And that's really the goal of today's webinar, is we want to try to help you understand that. Now, the ultimate cost for a PPM can be surprisingly low, or it can be, you know, higher than you expected. Unfortunately, if you try to go out, it can be hard to just go out and get a clear answer for the total cost of a solution. It's not something you can easily just Google, which we're trying to help at Kolme Group, but you can't just Google and say, how much is this going to cost me? Because there are so many variables, it's hard to get a clear understanding. And even then, the cost that you can maybe find there, it's not really the whole picture. As you'll see today, there are a number of costs that can kind of get you if you're not expecting them or if you don't plan for them. And we can speak from experience and authority on this because we've, as PMO leads, we have implemented these tools for ourselves and we felt that pain. And also with Kolme Group, we have implemented PPMs with a lot of our clients, and most of our clients, in fact, and we've seen all kinds of different costs and levels of preparation from our clients. So today we want to help you learn from those lessons. So let's jump in and talk about the cost. So let's start by looking at just a couple cost scenarios. And we're just going to jump right in, and I'm going to throw some numbers at you. They might be scary numbers, they might be things that you expected, but we're just going to start off and throw some numbers out, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about where these numbers come from and what can affect them. So let's talk about the first category of solution. We're going to call these, let's say, full-featured PPM solutions. And these are enterprise class solutions. These are highly configurable, highly scalable. They're designed for kind of mid-level enterprise all the way up to very, very large enterprises. And some of the names you'll see at this level are Clarizen is a big one. You'll hear Clarity and Workfront, ServiceNow, and there's a whole bunch at this tier. Just a set expectation, list price. The list price on these, you're probably looking at $60 to maybe even as high as $100 per user per month. Now, in addition to that, we have to think of the one-time onboarding cost because you've got to get that instance of the PPM tool configured live, get the user set up, and just to do the basic setting, onboarding, and preparation, that price can really range from $30,000 to $100,000 or even more just for that basic onboarding. We'll talk more about that in a moment. And so again, most of this is going to be sticker price, but let's take a couple quick scenarios here. So if I've got a team of 50 project managers, I want something's kind of basic. My licenses each year are going to cost about $42,000. My one-time implementation might be simple, so $30,000. So my first year is going to be around $72,000. If I've got a little bit bigger implementation, maybe I'm going to have 150 people, we're looking at 100 to 150,000 for annual licenses. A one-time fees of 100,000, maybe first year cost 200 and 250. Now, again, and we'll talk more about this, these are non-negotiated prices. This is typically what you're going to find from a sticker price level. So let's take a look at another scenario. So that's full-featured, full-on, top tier solutions. But let's take a look at another scenario. We're looking at just simple task management. So this is a situation where you have probably much more simple needs. You're not looking at big reporting. You're not looking at sophisticated analytics. You're not looking at automation. You're just saying, look, I just need a place to put my tasks and just kind of assign those to people, right? Just the simplest possible thing that you can use for an online task management tool. And these are things usually like Trello and Asana, Monday.com. And across the board, these are usually about $16 to $25 per user per month from a licensing perspective. They do have a freemium level. So if you've got very, very small teams or simple needs, that can be an option. But for most, enterprises that really need to take advantage of the features of these, you're probably looking at a paid plan. And so let's take a look at a couple of these. Now, these, of course, with these simple ones, you can probably expect you're not going to have much or anything in the way of an implementation fee. But what's not showing here, and we'll talk about later, is that you need to make sure that you are expecting that you're going to have to learn this tool yourself. If you're not going to bring in a partner or the software platform to come and tell you how to use it, teach you how to use it, onboard you, help you with training and onboarding configuration, you're going to have to invest some time yourself into figuring this out. So you can see we've got some costs here, and it's really pretty simple calculation, $16 to $25 range. So for a 50-person organization, you're probably looking at 13 grand worth of cost per year. For 150, it's 37,000 or thereabouts. So we talked about the bottom end, we talked about the top end. Now, what about kind of that mid tier? And in the PPM market, there is just a huge range of different capabilities and pricing from that top level down to the more task management. Mid-tier systems are typically not going to be as full featured as the full-on PPM solution. There's things like Smart Sheets and Microsoft Project Online. And what's interesting about this tier is that their license prices are about the same as what we saw for the lower tier, but the implementation costs are going to vary quite a lot. And the reason for this is because it depends, the amount of features that you can get out of this is really going to be highly variable as well. And when you're looking at a platform like Microsoft Project Online in particular is in this category where you can spend a lot of money buying little add-ons and little widgets to try to get it to do what you want to do. Well, again, we'll talk about that later, but that price for a tool like that where you're adding all those add-ons, that can really grow. And so in this tier, if you've got maybe 50 users, you're going to try to keep it simple, maybe 20,000 for onboarding. You're looking at about 35,000 for your first year. A little bit larger organization, 150. We're talking probably closer to 95,000 for that first year. And of course, the ongoing is just your annual licenses. So wanted to hit you at the very top with just high level numbers, but of course, those costs are not all the costs. And that might not even be where you end up from a cost perspective. So those cost numbers we just talked about are things like the licensing fees, and the onboarding. Now, the licensing fees, as we'll talk about in a minute, those can vary a lot and they can be highly negotiable depending on your volume. But when we talk about overall costs, we've got other costs to consider. We've got licensing fees, which we just talked about, basic onboarding. And later today, we're going to talk about customization and automation, support agreements, and integrations. And of course, there are soft costs involved, like your implementation support and the internal effort you have to put into those. And net, so those numbers we just kind of hit you with, you can spend like 10% of that if you're really smart about licensing and if you don't need full tier licenses, or you could spend 10 times that amount. So there are a lot of factors that can take that number we just showed you and make it go up or way down. So let's talk a little bit about that. Let's break down some of those costs and what you can expect there. But before that, let me just ask, those numbers we just threw out there, and I know we just threw a bunch of numbers at you, right off the bat, are those numbers about what you thought, or are they a lot higher, or ballpark? Just want to get a sense for how close those are to what your expectations are. All right, let's see what our results were. All right, good. Someone in the ballpark. All right, we're hoping to have very few people in know you're blowing our mind category, so that's good to see. So now we looked at the price tag, but let's go and break down some of these costs and get an understanding of what else can affect your costs and how you can manage those. So this is, again, very general use case that we're going to show you with this pie chart, but we wanted to show you some of the kind of typical costs that we see. So we talked about license fees, but we also are going to need to talk about license types. And I'm going to talk more about this in a minute, but we've also got our onboarding, but we also think about customization and automation. That can be a big slice depending on how much you want to have your implementation customized to your needs versus your ability to have concessions and just say, well, I'm just going to use it out of the box. Support agreements can have a really big impact on that. Are you comfortable managing your projects in this portfolio or your project management tool and not having that really high level support agreement and saving a few dollars? Or is the data in your system so time critical and so important for your business operation that you are ready to invest a little bit more in a higher support agreement? And of course, integrations are a really key part of this as well as any tool, and that can be a highly variable cost. And we'll talk about a few ways that you can manage those costs, or how you can get a little more value out of those. But generally, this is a fair representation of where we see the investment go when you go into your PPM tool. But let's dive into a couple of these pieces of the pie, starting with the licensing and personas. When we talk about licensing, it's not as simple as one license for one person. An important process that you're going to want to go through is try to understand the license levels. The different PPM tools go about this different ways, but pretty consistently, they will usually have different levels of licensing. So I might have a full-on planner license for a project manager where they can go in and they can create plans, they can do budgeting, they can manage all aspects of the project. This can be, depending on the tool, it can be called a planning licensing, planner, full project manager license, something like this. And then oftentimes you'll have other tiers. So you might very often have something like a team member or a time entry or a resource kind of a license. And these are usually highly discounted from the full. I mean, sometimes these can be half the price of a full license. And these are just that. They're the task workers that get assigned work. Maybe they can't manage the full project plan, but they can see the tasks that are assigned to them. They can do time entry. They can maybe manage tickets and issues, risks, things like this that they're assigned to. And then oftentimes we'll also see a really light version of a license, which is more for requesters. It's maybe a report access, it's maybe a social license, depending on the platform. But these are usually the really cheap licenses, limited capability to change things in the system. Usually these are kind of your executives or people that aren't too involved in project delivery, but they might need to get access to collaborate or view some of your information. And it's really important to, when you're looking at a tool, to stop early on in the process and start analyzing what kind of licensing you need, because the license cost can be, it can affect your overall license cost by 50 to 100%. So like I said, team member can be half of what a full is, and a requester can be, again, half or less than what a team member is. In some cases, it can even be free. But so let's dig a little bit deeper into this concept of a persona, and how do you try and map or prepare for mapping your users into the different license levels. And one technique that we like to use when we work with our clients and you're going down the path of getting a PPM is building a persona matrix. And this is kind of a crude example of that. But what we do is we have a matrix template that we work with, and we say, what are all the different things that my people are going to need to do in the PPM tool? And then I categorize them. You can see in this grid, I've got what my PMO administrators are going to do, what my project managers have to do, what my team leaders have to do. And I kind of tick off each task that each kind of persona needs to do. And then I count the number of people I have in each one of those categories. And this is an ideal conversation tool when you start going out and start talking with PPM suppliers. Say, look, these are the different kinds of people that I have. And these are the things that they need to do. And that can help drive discussions around what's the appropriate licensing level for your organization. And of course, this is really important because buying the wrong license type can really cost you. So we've seen instances, I know from my mistake I made when I did my first PPM implementation as a PMO leader, is I totally miscounted the license and I ended up buying twice as many licenses as I actually needed. And in some cases, we've seen clients where they didn't buy enough licenses, so they kind of have to go back. And so it's good to get a feel for where this is, because as you saw from our pie diagram earlier, this is a really big pie of your overall cost. So we want to make sure we get it right. So let's do a quick poll. Just curious if anyone on the phone has done some kind of an exercise like this to try to map or identify their personas to the number of users that they have in their organization. All right, let's see where we're at on this. All right, it's good to see a lot of our attendees have. If you haven't, it's certainly never too late to get started on that process. I think if you're interested, if you reach out to us, we can give you a copy of that template to give you a nice start on that process. All right, so let's move on and talk about something we do see sometimes, which is freebies. So unless you're a small shop and you happen to be using a freemium service like the free level of Asana or free level of Trello, free licenses are not going to be free. And here's where we see this is very often we'll see situations where bundles where an enterprise already has, it's like they work with an ERP or an ITSM service desk provider of some kind, and they start looking for a tool and somebody says, oh, hey, our ERP has a plugin for PPM. Let's just get that. Or, hey, our ITSM, they've got a plug-in and we can just add it and it's their PPM tool and it's great and we can get those licenses for free. And you can you can get good deals on licenses, but one thing that we would warn you with is don't pick a tool just because you can get a deal on it. Because what we've seen over and over is if you implement the wrong tool, it's going to cost you, even if it's cheaper right now. Because I can talk about a very specific client that we worked with in the past, and they went through a 4-year journey where they had an ERP tool and they needed to find a good resource management tool. And they said, look, we need a way to manage our resources and our projects. Let's use our ERP's PPM plugin. That'll be great. We can get it for basically free. So they implemented it. They paid maybe they got the licenses free, but they had to pay for the implementation. They had to go through all the change management, train all their people, take all the time out of everybody's day for weeks or months, whatever it was, to get that thing onboarded and launch it. Found out it just would not work for them. It was not fit for purpose. So they got rid of that, and then somebody said, "Hey, our ITSM has an add-on that will do all this. Let's bring that in and let's do that." And the same thing, they got free licenses this time. Then but they still had to pay for implementation services, training, change management, get everybody onboarded, move all the data over. And they tried and struggled and struggled and struggled, and they had to pull the plug on that. Then they finally said, "Look, let's go ahead and do a proper requirements gathering, and let's pick the right tool for us." And it was finally that third one that we were fortunately involved in that implementation that they finally implemented and was successful. And that whole journey took them 4 years. So those cheap licenses and the free licenses not only cost them a whole lot of money, it cost them years of opportunity cost before they could figure that out. So that's kind of our word of warning there, and something to think about. Again, if you can get a bundle deal and they do meet your requirements, and great, go for it. But our recommendation there is don't just buy them just because you can get them for free licenses. But now so those are licenses. Let's talk about another big cost category that you can expect. And those are integrations. Now, assuming most of us here are project managers or managed project managers are involved in that. And projects don't live in isolation. You've got to interface with finance, you interface with multiple teams, marketing, sales, HR, usually a lot of different areas in your organization. And the same way, your PPM tool has to do the same kind of thing. And typical integrations we see are directory services for automatic provisioning, deprovisioning, identity access management, and all that. And then we all see a lot of ERP integrations because projects need money, and projects, create financial forecasts and things like this. So that is very often we'll see those integrations with ERP systems for forecasting and actuals, and HR systems for user data, time off, cost rates, things like this. We see a lot of integration points around file repository because you want your PPM to be your main central sort of dashboard for how you execute your projects. And if you can integrate your file repository with that, then that lets you keep that one workspace for everything and keep it all connected. We'll see a lot of data warehouse integrations for reporting and analytics to mix your PPM data with maybe your ERP data or CRM data, and then other reporting packages as well. More and more, as organizations adopt agile tools, a very, very important integration is integrating your agile tool sets with your PPM so you can understand the total financial picture, delivery picture for your programs that span different teams in your organization, agile and those that aren't. So agile tools are becoming more and more prominent and more important in enterprises. And finally, IT service management systems or ticketing systems for, they can be a place to initiate work or to track issues for certain projects. So that can be an important one. Now, just rough numbers, integrations can add 10,000 to 50,000 to your implementation cost for each one. Some really, really complicated deep integrations can run you like, it can be 6 figures, but those are really the high-end ones. Like when you're talking about very customized, bi-directional SAP integrations, they can be pretty involved. So I think 10,000 to 30,000 is typically more what we would see. 50,000 for a very high-end, complex one. So, but when it comes to integrations, there are a couple different approaches that you can take which can greatly impact how those costs end up racking up. And they also impact how you maintain it. So a couple things to think about if you decide that there are a couple integrations that you really need to have and you're looking to. So one is a file-based integration. So the ideal here is this can be a very manual process. So it can be basically free from an integration perspective, where you're taking the extract of some kind and you can even manually import that into the PPM tool. We see this sometimes for project initiation, or maybe a weekly job to import timesheets into your PPM tool, or take data out of your PPM and import it into your ERP. So that can be manual, or you can take that to the next step and write a script, a Python script or something like this, that can automatically pull and push that integration data. And what's nice about this is that if it's the first time you're integrating the data, you're still trying to work out the requirements, it's really quick and easy to respond to this, to say, I'm going to add another column, I'm going to change the frequency of this sync. So it's a nice way to get started if you're still trying to figure out what this integration is. Now, that kind of approach, of course, is not going to be as robust as a fully automated one. It might require some manual effort, but we always, where it makes sense, start simple and then add sophistication and add automation over time. It's going to be more cost effective for you. Another approach you can use is to leverage a commercial middleware, some kind of integration platform. And there are a bunch of these out there. There's Jitterbit and there's Zapier, and there's a bunch of these middleware tools that are out there that can offer canned or very simple low code or no code integrations. And the way these middleware platforms work is you buy connectors or you build connectors, and it synchronizes the data. And these can be nice because sometimes they will have pre-built integrations. And so if your needs meet those, then that can be a pretty quick and easy way to get an integration up and running. And these can be really pretty robust. Some of the downsides to this commercial middleware is it's another recurring cost you have to consider. You're probably going to have to go through some kind of information security review, and they're going to have to be okay with that platform and with those integrations. And depending on your organization, sometimes that security approval can be kind of heavy. And so those are some of the considerations with that middleware piece. Now, another way that you can go is full-on custom API. And again, this depends on the capability of your PPM tool, but especially if you've got in-house talent who can do API integration for you. And if your tools support that kind of integration, it can be really attractive to just build your own, because you don't have the recurring cost of a commercial middleware solution. You can customize it to meet your needs and do what you want. You might find that you have to build maybe a middleware database yourself, depending on the sophistication of your integration. But what's nice about this is that you can own those costs. You don't have to rely on a third party to fix it if something breaks. You don't have to rely on a third party to enhance it when you want to grow it. You can rely on your own internal development team. So if you can make that work, that can be a really, really attractive solution. So something to look into. Of course, not everybody has API developers at the ready and available to do your integration work. So this is a great opportunity to talk to your integration partner and say, hey, look, I'm looking at this kind of integration. What can you help me with? And so again, when you look at integrations, just be aware that you have this whole spectrum. You can go from the simple file paste, which costs you can cost you very little or nothing other than a little bit of work, all the way up to full-on custom API integrations that can be fully automated and can give you some really, really good capability in your PPM tool. There you go. So those are integrations. And so let's talk about another area that can really affect your costs. And that is, how customized is your solution going to be? So when you get a tool, and it's not just a PPM tool, one of the considerations that we should always consider is, how customized am I going to make this? Now, a lot of these PPM tools are extraordinarily powerful in their ability to be customized to your business processes and your business needs. And but it's always a business, it's a balancing act that you should think through, because if you use the tool out of the box, quote unquote out of the box, you're not going to have as much customization. You're going to be using the tool as it is and maybe conforming some of your processes to using the tool. The benefit to that is, well, there's very, very little from an implementation standpoint. Maybe the supplier's out of the box training is going to suit your team, and you have minimal customized training you have to go through. And that can keep it very simple, very easy to scale and grow and use. But what you're giving up there is that a good tool that's well implemented and well adopted can do a lot to automate your processes, make you work more efficiently, and help you with your delivery. And usually that's one of the main reasons we're going to be buying a PPM tool. So it's usually more of a question of how crazy do we get with the automation? Do I create an intake process for new projects that has 1 or 2 steps of approval, or do I add 10 steps of approval and have it automating people or emailing people and automated approvals and reminders every so many days? You can get really crazy with very simple processes with this configuration and automation. So much so that it can add just a little bit of cost, like 10% to a lot. It can double or triple the amount of professional services that are required to implement your PPM if you really insist on having it very customized to every one of your processes. So it's always a little bit of a balancing act. And you can have it the way you want to, but you can pay for it. But even so, one of the pieces of advice we want to give you that we see a lot of is, even if you want your organization to leverage 100 amazing customizations and features from your PPM tool, if you roll out a tool with 100 new features and try to put that in front of your user base, how many of those features do you think people are going to adopt? Probably none. Probably maybe they'll stumble with 1 or 2. The problem is you can't implement too many things too quickly. So we always recommend starting simple, roll out 5 features, get those embedded, get those really working well, make everybody go, wow, those 5 features are amazing, before you go on to the next ones. So another big impact can be the number of unique use cases that you have. So and what we mean by this is that when you implement your PPM tool, especially if you're in an enterprise, you've got different departments that maybe work different ways. So I've got my IT team and they have projects and they want a tool. And you've got marketing and they have a way of working and they have projects and they want a tool. And you've got maybe research and development. They all have maybe different ways of managing projects. So if I take that use case and let's say across these 3 different departments, I have 100 users, just to pick a number. Well, I'm going to have to have basically 3 different implementations if they all work in completely different ways. However, if I can work with those 3 departments and say, let's set a couple standard processes, standard ways of working that we're going to put into the tool, I can implement 1 use case. So it's, I don't want to say a third, but it's going to be much less work to implement 1 common use case than re-implementing for 3 completely different ways of working. And so you can expect each additional completely unique use case. We have here 50% addition, maybe 25, 50%, even more, depending on how radically different these different use cases are. So if you're able to keep them consistent, and honestly, implementing a PPM tool is a great excuse for delivery leaders to go and start to, maybe in a sneaky way, enforce a little bit of consistency across teams and consistency across processes. So, which is nice from an enterprise perspective, because now you can start to have a consistent view of reporting, consistent view of financials, of resource management across the organization, which helps you be more agile and more effective as an overall organization when it comes to project delivery. Now, the last big category we're going to cover right now that can impact your costs is how you're going to support the system and how you're going to be engaged in the implementation. So generally, what you'll see is a lot of PPM implementations and partners will go in with something that they might call an enablement strategy. And the approach here is more of, hey, we're going to come in as product experts and we are going to help you implement. And this is really empowering for your organization if you can at all support this and engage your resources. It's a great way to get your team up to speed, not just how to use the tool, but how to configure and own the tool. The broad trend for SaaS tools is to take ownership and configuration of business tools out of the hands of the IT department and into the hands of the business units, including the PMO. And so the more you're able to learn how to configure this tool and use the tool, manage it yourself, the more empowered you are to have your tool help you with your processes and your delivery. So this is a great approach, and it can help reduce your overall costs because you're involved. You can have your team take responsibility for implementation and configuration of certain aspects, but you have to account for the fact that you have to dedicate the resources, and generally speaking, the timeline is probably going to be a little bit longer because your team's going to have to spend some more time getting up to speed before they can start playing an active role in implementation. The other way to go on that is really just to say, hey, you guys come and implement it and train me to do what you need to do when it's done. And you can do that. Sometimes organizations just simply don't have the bandwidth to do that. Just be aware your implementation costs are going to be a little bit more if you're 100% reliant on an external partner or provider to do all that configuration for you. Another related cost are going to be support packages and SLAs. So different tool providers are going to have different approaches to this, but generally you can, when you start talking with providers, start asking about support packages and what they look like. Sometimes these will include better SLAs, they can include test and development environments, they can include training vouchers, they can even include some configuration hours or a bucket of time. So there are a lot of different things that can play into what are in these packages, but do make sure you have that conversation because those plans can be up to say 20% of your license costs. So they can be very, very worth it, especially if you have a very business critical processes or business critical things that you're putting into your PPM tool. Those can be worth it, but just something to be aware of and make sure you account for when you are doing your budgeting for your system. So those are the main categories that can really make that needle jump when it comes to your overall cost for PPM. But let's talk about some of the costs that can kind of sneak up on you that maybe you aren't always ready for. And the first one of those we're going to talk about is data migration. So when we get our new tool, you might stop to think, wow, I've got this great new tool. I'm going to be able to track all these things. Hey, why don't I take all of my old data and push it into my new system? It'll be great. I can have consolidated reporting for new projects and old projects, and it'll be great. Although sometimes, depending on your organization, you might not actually have a choice. You might have some data retention policies or requirements for your projects that you have to maintain. Either way, be aware that that process of data migration can be surprisingly challenging and complex and time consuming, because wherever that data is today, you're going to have to transform it, reconfigure it to meet the requirements of your new tool, whatever it is, and then get that imported. You're also going to have to add a quality check on there because you don't want to start pulling in a bunch of garbage into your brand new tool that you maybe have new ways of managing data. So generally speaking, we would really ask you to consider closely if you really need to bring in any legacy data. Timesheets, old project plans, and things like that. It's better to start clean if you can possibly swing it than to start bringing in a lot of historical data. This particularly goes for the idea of project plans. So just to be ready, even if you've got in-flight projects that you're going to migrate, and the typical use case is, hey, we've got a bunch of Microsoft project professional plans and we just want to import them. Well, as an example, some of the challenges you're going to run into there is that the schema of your PPM is probably much more advanced and sophisticated than whatever you're pulling out of a Microsoft project plan. So once you get it into the tool, you'll probably have to do some updates and transformation. Next, you've got, if you're a sophisticated user of Microsoft Project, you have resources assigned to those. Well, those resources probably aren't going to line up to the resource names that you have in your PPM. So once you import them, you may not have the right resources assigned, you might not get any. And then if you decide you want to get those aligned to make sure the import is clean, that can be a lot of work. And maybe you've got 20 project plans that you've got to do that to. So it's just a lot of work and a lot of trouble. So just be aware, if you're thinking of data migration, try to rethink that if you can. If you got to have it, you've got to have it, and just expect that it's going to be some extra effort. The next category of costs that can kind of sneak up on you are process development costs. And we come in to a lot of clients and say, all right, we're gonna buy this PPM, we're gonna implement it, it's gonna be great. and we're going to have this great, let's say, project intake process, and we're going to have all this governance. We say, great, show me the process. And they say, I don't know. What do you usually do? And it's very challenging because every organization is different in their needs. And so if that's the situation, we have to say, okay, well, now we've got to stop, and we have to now let's go spend some time understanding your processes, doing requirements gathering, do some process development and business analysis to give you a good process to help you do your project intake. Now, very often, an organization already has an idea of what they want to do. So if you're one of those organizations that you know what you want, our recommendation is go through the process before you start engaging with your PPM and map out that process. Get your swim lanes and your Visios or your use cases, however you want to document those requirements. Figure out all the processes that you want to put into the tool and map them out and have them ready. So when the supplier comes and says, all right, I'm ready to start configuring your processes. What are they? You can say, here you go, let's walk through them. Now, very often, if you're implementing a PPM tool, it's because you're in a situation where you're saying, okay, I'm ready to take the next step to make my organization more mature. And maybe you're not sure what are the best practices for these kinds of processes or what's possible, what are other organizations doing? Then that's actually an ideal time to engage with an experienced PPM implementation partner to help give you that advice, to help learn what are others in your industry doing, what are the most efficient ways to do this for our maturity level, and take advantage of that so that you can start off with a strong solution. And if you do that, I think that's a great way to get value, but just make sure that you are planning for that when you are planning for your budgeting and your estimation, and make sure that your partner understands that that is a clear need of yours and that that's accounted for, and they will take the time that you need to help you develop those processes. Going on to the next one, let's talk about another cost you might not be thinking of. And those are operational costs. These are usually SaaS platforms, so you might think, well, there's no operational costs involved, but you'll find that there are. And in particular, you need to make sure that you're planning to have your operational team ready to support that. So you're going to need to have people who understand how to configure it, how to manage users, answer questions, and things like that. So you will have some operational obligations for a SaaS tool, even though you don't have to host it yourselves. So just something to think about from a planning perspective, that manpower. Related to that are our support costs, which is another category that we can look at. And I think we already talked a little bit about this, or what are the SLAs that you can get? Do I get my team trained? So those kinds of costs can kind of sneak up on you if you suddenly find, well, I need to get a couple people trained, and you have to start planning for taking them out of work, putting them into training, and paying for that kind of education. All right. Finally, there's one more category of hidden costs we want to hit you with, and that is training costs. So when you get your new PPM tool ready to go, you're going to have to train your team members. And there are a couple of things to consider. Is the best way to go is usually a train-to-trainer approach. So have your partner go ahead and train your trainers so you can carry that training forward to your team. Another way, if you want to save a little bit on this, and if your team is highly engaged in the implementation, they can develop the training themselves, maybe with a little bit of help from your provider, so that can save you some cost. We also recommend that you record your trainings, and that will make it simpler to support onboardings in the future. Either way, we recommend having a strong training plan, which will cut down on the retraining or re-education costs later, and it will help drive your adoption. So we've talked a lot about the costs. We've talked about ways that you can, costs that can sneak up on you, but let's hit on a couple ways that you can keep the cost manageable. So one of them is moderate your expectations and simplify your needs. When we get into a tool of any kind, it's easy to get very enthusiastic and start saying, I want this, I want this, I want this, I want all these features turned on, I want to roll out all these cool things. And that's tough. First, it's probably too much for your team to take off the bat. Plus, it's really going to inflate your initial implementation costs. We really recommend going in with a minimum lovable product that's going to deliver immediate value to your team, get that rolled out, have that be a success, and then move on to the next thing. Next is get involved, learn the tool and be active during the implementation. This can empower you not just during the implementation, but for ongoing support afterwards. And I just mentioned using an agile approach, starting with a minimum lovable product with all these amazing features. We want to implement them all, but try to step back and start with the most important ones and layer the rest of them on after the fact. And maybe one of the most important tips we can give you for not just for PPMs, but any tool is really invest in organizational change management. Even the best tool in the world, configured in the best possible way in the world, is going to fail if you can't get your team members to use it. And that's what organizational change management is all about. So a little investment there can go a long, long way. It's a really good investment in time and effort. So there's some ways just off the top of our heads that you can keep your costs down. Now, we've talked this whole time about cost because that's really what the webinar is about. But with all this talk, you might think, is it worth it? I mean, this is starting to sound like maybe a lot of money in your business, but definitely it absolutely is worth it, or can be worth it if you do it right. So just a couple of recent client examples I'm going to hit you with. We worked with a professional services company, multi-billion-dollar company based in Europe. As a services company, billable utilization is everything to their bottom line, their top line too. And through implementing a PPM tool, we increased their billable utilization by 20%. We worked with another company not long ago where we implemented, they were an internal PMO, and part of our implementation was to help them better manage their project financials. And in that process, we found out that they were misallocating 30 to 40% of their CapEx project labor. Another organization we worked with when we implemented their PPM tool and went through that whole discovery and analysis phase, we found that 75% of their projects were not even aligned to their organizational strategic objectives. And they were companies that said, I've got these strategic things, why aren't they getting done? Well, this process helped them understand that they were not in alignment and helped them correct that. Another organization we worked with, on their internal calculations, this wasn't our number, they saved nearly $1 million of internal resource efforts by automating processes and making obsolete a lot of the operational tasks that burdened and drugged down their entire operations team. So based on, these are just a couple recent examples, but based on our experience, it is so worth the investment if you go in and you implement your PPM tool right. So let's talk next steps. So if you're looking at this and you're thinking, all right, well, this is kind of cool. I want to start going down this path a little bit more. A couple recommendations that we would have is start building a stakeholder coalition. Start talking to the stakeholders in your organization about what a PPM tool can do for them, what it can do for you, how it can affect delivery and make you more successful there. When you go through that process, you start thinking about how you're going to justify the return on your investment. And there are a lot of ways you can do this: operational efficiencies, better forecasting, maybe even more profitable engagements, depending on your type of business. Once you get a feel for the value you're going to try to get out of your tool, then is the time to start working on identifying your requirements. And once you have that together, then start looking at tools. Try not to jump the gun and start shopping before you have an idea of what you need. It'll be more efficient for you. And so there you go. Let's get started. So if you are interested in going down this path, we've got a bunch of resources on our site. We've got a good article, How Much Does It Cost? Which is an article based on the content today. We're publishing that article today with a little more detail than we're able to go in today's webinar. You can find us on YouTube, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We're putting more and more tutorials on YouTube. And we also have published a couple other articles on PMO management overall. Our next webinar that we're putting together right now was really how do you justify the investment in the PPM? We just touched on a couple high-level bullets just now, but if you think this is the way I want to go, how am I going to sell it, this idea, to my investment committee and get the funding? Well, we want to help you out with that. So we're going to be putting together a webinar on that. If you, after all this, you just want to ask a couple questions, our door is always open. So you can email us for a quick consult. Ask me 100 questions if you like. Happy to do that. I love to discuss this and love to learn about what the community out there is working towards from the tooling perspective and in their PMOs. And there we go.
Well, thanks, Kim. That seems amazing. Thanks so much for all the knowledge. We do have a couple of questions that came in for the Q&A. If you're open to answering, how does that sound?
I'd love to.
Awesome. Okay, great. So the first one that we got, I think, is just a really great question, but what is the biggest oops you've seen from a cost perspective in a PPM implementation?
I've seen a couple of them. The biggest one, I'm guilty of this, as I think I mentioned, is going in and going through the whole purchase process and not having your license counts correct. So it's worth a little bit of investment of time up front to really go through and understand how many people you're going to have on board in the system, because to get the good discounts, you're going to need to commit to 1, 2, or 3 years licensing. And so you go in and maybe make that kind of commitment. And if you find out your license counts are wildly off, that can be challenging. The other one is going in and trying to implement too many things too soon. So you do end up spending a lot of money up front, but then that really does, we've seen that really impact the adoption. And you have to put a lot more time and effort. And it's a lot more work to get that adoption done if you start implementing way too many things too fast, like sophisticated financial planning at the same time you're doing resource planning and project management. So start as simple as you can, make those early implementation of features a huge win, and you'll never stop rolling out features.
Never ever. That's the promise, right?
Yeah.
Tied to that question is, how negotiable are license costs?
That's a tough one. It's like how long is a piece of string? So
Right.
it depends on the PPM tool that you're working with, but they can be. And just like any business negotiation, if you can negotiate much lower prices, but just expect that you're going to have to make some commitments as well, like longer terms, higher license counts. If you're going to go in with a couple dozen users, you probably don't have a lot of negotiating power. If you're going to commit more users, if you're going to say, look, I'm not just going to get my PM, my delivery team, I'm going to get my whole organization on board on this, then that gives you a little more negotiating power, because you're really going all in on the platform. And a lot of the suppliers out there are going to respond to that. So it's really, if you want a commitment for lower price, you need to be ready to commit more from your organization.
That's a great response. And I definitely know you go into more detail on that within the blog.
Mm-hmm.
So we invite everybody to check that out. Another question that I saw come through is, what potential funding roadblocks can someone a project manager occur with their C-suite?
So that's a great question. That's why we want to follow up with a whole nother webinar, because it's such an important discussion. What I see very often is, so sometimes you'll get the roadblock to say, well, hey, I can get cheap licenses that come from SAP because they have a PPM tool and we have SAP. So sometimes they'll throw that at you and say, well, that can be free. And then you have to say, well, look, there are a lot more costs involved in that. There's implementation, change control. We don't even know if that's fit for purpose. But the challenge that I see most often there is justifying the soft benefits. So if I say, hey, if I implement this PPM tool, I'm going to save $100,000 in labor, I have to be ready to justify that in terms that my management team is going to recognize and accept. And so maybe it's things like, because they might say, well, you can't, if I save 10 hours per project manager per week, I can't say that's a saving because I still have those people employed, and you're telling me I can fire a project manager.
Right.
And so you have to rephrase that discussion to say, look, instead of managing administrivia, my project managers are going to focus on outstanding delivery, and right now we're losing, I don't know, $50,000 a month due to late delivery, I can reel that into 20 to half of that. So it's really having that discussion, and a lot of that is managing expectations on what they will accept as a value.
Love it. Great answer. Thank you so much. And Simon, I saw your question come in as well. The justification of a PPM investment will be the next topic we cover for our webinar series. So you can come back and join us in July for that, which is really exciting. I know, Kim, you really want to dig deeper into that topic. There's a lot to cover there. So I'm eagerly anticipating the follow-up webinar.
Yeah, that'll be a really good one, because so today's webinar, I apologize, I fire hosed everybody with a bunch of data and a bunch of facts because there's a lot of content. When we talk about justification, there's a little more soft skills involved in there. So we'll talk about how to manage that conversation, different perspectives on different ways to approach that. So a little more on the soft skills will be incorporated into that, as well as the hard numbers.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you, Kim, so much for your time today. I know we all appreciated it. Everyone, we did put the blog post URL inside of the chat, so please make sure you check that out. We will be sending the replay out later today, so be mindful of your email. You'll see that come through. And if you do have any questions, we're going to leave up a slide with our contact information. If you'd like to learn a little bit about your PPM time or your journey with PPM, Kim is available for a free consultation for about 15 minutes. So we will be sending that out to you as well, directly from Kim. So thanks so much, Kim, for all your time today.
Yeah, and if I could just add one little bit in our last minute.
Yeah.
I really love to talk to the community about this stuff. I love to learn about different use cases, what are your challenges, what are your struggles? My door really is open, and I do look forward to talking to people. So if you want to just have an open, honest talk about PPM tools, what they can and what they can't do, or where are the problems beyond that, or your specific challenges, I really look forward to that. It's the highlight of my day when I get to do that.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day and weekend, and we look forward to hearing from you soon.